Hello everyone, welcome back to another one of our Through the Bible studies, in which we won't be going verse by verse, but rather point by point through a book of the Bible in order to not substitute your personal Bible study, but rather inspire it, give you an idea of the major events, the Cliff Note versions, if you will, essentially giving you an idea of where to look for these certain themes that you may be familiar with, but not exactly have memorized by heart. So when we're going through this, remember, this is to encourage you to look up these things in further detail in the Bible, because I won't be discussing every detail, but I'll be picking out the major themes and giving you an idea of why these books are there in the first place, who they were by, when they were written, so on and so forth. So let's start with the book of 1 Samuel, or rather continue. We've been doing this for a while. 1 Samuel is the first of two books that were written by the prophet Samuel. And what was interesting about this as well is that this covers a span of history that not necessarily Samuel was entirely involved in, because Samuel actually physically dies before the end of 1 Samuel. So how did he physically pen all of these things? Well, that's not actually the point. I know I said that these are attributed to the prophet Samuel, but it's not that he physically wrote them. It's that he was involved in the formulation of this history, because Samuel was the prophet, the last judge, if you will, that was used by God to anoint Israel's first king and her greatest king. Now, recognize I emphasize the "and" because those were two different people. Israel's first king was King Saul, and as we'll be studying today, the book of 1 Samuel mostly covers why he was the first king and not the best king. Likewise, Samuel also anointed King David for his ministry and ultimately succeeding King Saul. And while that A, didn't happen right away, or B, even fully happen in Samuel's lifetime, he was directly responsible, and he was the one used by God to anoint these kings. So their story would be associated with Samuel. And that's why oftentimes in the Hebrew versions of the Bible that you would read, what's called the Tanakh, this is actually just coupled into one book, the book of Samuel. But we categorize it because one discusses Saul's reign start to finish, and the other one starts with David's reign start to finish. So all these things being put out, let's go into the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Who wrote the book of 1 Samuel? So once again, not associating him, but who was actually responsible for physically penning these things? Well, Samuel, of course, was the first, but because he physically died before the book was completed and didn't have a ghostwriter, so to speak, the one who took these things up is actually noted by name as the scribe, the head scholar, the one who would be responsible for keeping track of Israel's history as they witnessed it, which of course would be the how this book was recorded. They saw these events with their own eyes, and this time in their history was recorded not just by Samuel, but by Nathan, who was the successor prophet-wise, not judge-wise or somehow a superior representative of God. There were prophets throughout Israel's history, and God consistently involved himself in their lives. We'll be discussing this when we get into 1 Kings, the prophet Elijah, 2 Kings, the prophet Elisha, and all of these other individuals, even going back to Judges, you'd remember there was this consistent theme of people showing up, not always by name, but always representing the same name, and that is of God. What kind of book is 1 Samuel? Is it poetry? Is it prophecy? Or is it history? Well, this book is meant to be taken, advertised as such, and can be confirmed as such, as eyewitness history. And the reason for this is because we not only have accounts of embarrassment, meaning that they give details about their greatest heroes that they wouldn't make up, that they were either true or they were shooting themselves in the foot socially. We not only noted this with Ruth in that it was discussing the family of King David, it wouldn't admit that his great-grandmother was a Moabite unless that was actually a reality, that there was a better point to be gleaned from all of these things. Likewise, we're told about the good, the bad, and the ugly from Israel's kings, not just on Saul's part, but even David's. We're told about his mistakes, his lapses in faith, his outright war crimes, if you will. And they wouldn't be making these things up unless it was a reality that they had to admit it. Secondly, the reason we can trust these things, beyond just accounts of embarrassment, are the accounts themselves. We can confirm these things archaeologically. We can dig up the names of these individuals. They're available in Jerusalem as well as the British Museum today, in noting family records and rolls of the people, the places, the events, the happenings that are mentioned by name in these places. So If I were to make these things up, obviously the city would be fantasy, the people would be perhaps real, but their deeds would also be fantasy. If this was reality, I'd want to keep this as close to, or rather not as vague as possible. So follow my logic here. If there's something that we can discuss about the historical method, we need to be able to confirm people, places, and events. We can go to places that are mentioned by name. We can see their involvement mentioned with the people by name. And these things are nothing, or if not nonfiction, I guess is the best way to put it. These stories aren't made up. We can confirm them and have confirmed them through archaeology with more on the way. But that is a note in why we would trust this as eyewitness history, not just because it's advertised, but confirmed as such. When did this take place? The 10th century BC. That's important to remember because the writing style also reflects that of someone who was living 1000 BC. So that would be noting 3,000 years ago, not writing the same way that we do in 21st century America. And that's speaking from my perspective. Wherever you're listening to in the world, we generally write historical records in a certain way, and if 1 Samuel seems confusing to you as far as the literary format, that's because it wasn't written during our time. It was written during this time, and that's important to note. Where did it take place? The entirety of this takes place in the region of Israel. Now, this wasn't the complete Israel that we know today, nor the Israel that God intended for it to be. But all of the regions that they fought in and these events took place in are the regions that were either controlled by Israel or were currently under occupation by the Philistines and the Amalekites and several other names that we'll be noting as we get to them. Why was this book written? Well, essentially it's been discussed, but I'll repeat it for clarity's sake. The record of the first king of Israel and the major differences that their relationships with God made on their reigns. How was this book recorded? Well, Samuel and Nathan saw these events as they occurred. The credibility and the record of information would include all the things that we discussed. It's not just told that it's history, it's confirmed by history through archaeology, and it includes accounts of these guys' lives that we wouldn't want to make up if we were trying to just inspire ourselves to making Israel this nationalistic pride thing. No, you wouldn't say that your king literally lived under voluntary occupation of Israel's enemies for a time and lied to him about attacking his allies while claiming you were attacking them, and all of this because of a lapse in faith of God. Once again, we'll get to that at the end of the book, but these things wouldn't have been made up is the point. So, starting with the book of 1 Samuel, there's a little bit of history to summarize because Samuel's involvement actually doesn't come into play until chapter 2 because he actually wasn't even born yet. The book actually begins with the account of the high priest Eli. He was the descendant of Aaron, the older brother of Moses, the first high priest specifically chosen by God to have that family role. And Eli essentially was, well, this is coming out of the time of the judges, so outright neglecting his responsibility, not just as high priest and the spiritual representative of Israel, but also as a parent. And the entire nation was in chaos. His kids were corrupt. He wasn't any better. And basically, God sent a prophet, we aren't told his name, where he told him, look, you know what God's word says. You know the responsibilities that you have. You haven't been doing them. And this is a warning. If you, and remember that, God doesn't judge someone for their sins until they A, have received a warning, B, have had a means of escape and neglected it, then judgment falls. Always in that policy. The same for Noah's flood, the same for Sodom and Gomorrah, the same for the tribulation period coming soon to a world near you. You ready for the rapture, my friends? That's the point that's being made. But essentially, Eli was told by this prophet, look, you have had every opportunity, you have had every reason, and you know the reasons why what you're doing is wrong. You and your kids have been taking advantage of God's people. When they bring sacrifices, you don't let them enjoy the meal with God. By the way, that's what a sacrifice was. You would bring the animal to God in either a burnt or peace offering. Grain, you'd bring bread, but it was the same deal. You'd enjoy a meal with God. The only meals you wouldn't eat were a sin or trespass offering, which were notably more common, but those would actually be eaten by the priest. That's how they would support themselves. All these things being noted, you have been taking advantage of the people. Instead of enjoying the leftovers, as God commanded, you're going in first and getting fat off of the things that should belong to God, that should belong to his people. Your kids are taking advantage of the girls who are just coming here to worship God. You guys are doing this ministry to make yourselves rich, and God is going to call you on that. He was told that what you were doing was ultimately going to cause him to pay the piper, and he doesn't turn. He just says, well, I guess I get what I deserve then. And then just moved on with his life. And meanwhile, while this was going on, a woman whose name was Hannah was dealing with a very bad family situation because of her husband. Now, note, in that culture, there was one way for a girl to get respect, and that was by having lots of babies. Doesn't that mean that's the way it's supposed to be? It's the way it was. And Hannah didn't have children, but her husband, Elkanah, loved her very much. However, not loving her enough to say, you know what, I don't care if we have kids, I value you, I want to focus my relationship on you, and how God defined it, he married a girl on the side whose name was Peninnah, and basically the side chick was the one who had the kids, and Hannah was the one who received all the affection. How do you think Peninnah felt about that? Well, naturally, as girls in their expertise in psychological warfare do, understood that if I can't get my husband's affection, I can certainly make Hannah pay for it. So she rubbed in her face every single opportunity she had of the fact that she couldn't have kids. You were cursed by God. It was actually a legal reason for divorce in those days. So constantly calling her relationship, not only with her husband, but with her God, in question. And ultimately, this just made her life miserable to the point where even when they were trying to worship God, in spite of the social circumstances, she just didn't want to eat. And Elkanah, being the helpful guy that he always is, when a girl, this is just advice to my fellow bros here, I'm the only boy in my family, I have an idea of how that social climate works. When a girl is just feeling miserable, don't try to explain it logically, just be there for her. Because Elkanah, good intentions aside, he just says, well, honey, what are you so sad about? You have me. Aren't I better to you than 10 sons? Ugh, no, I want a baby. That's the problem here. You aren't solving that problem. And essentially, understanding this, Hannah decides not to turn to her husband, but to God. And she goes before the tabernacle and is just weeping and praying in her heart, God, if you give me a son, I will dedicate him to you all the days of his life. And what do you know it? God had exactly that kind of plan in mind. He was waiting for someone who would ultimately do the job that Eli refused to do. And before he had a man, he needed a woman. Now, Eli was watching all of this take place. Obviously, he wasn't involving himself in the ministry. He was just observing it, checking his Facebook or Twitter, just while this was all going on, and saw this woman whose mouth was moving, but nothing was coming out. And he figured she was drunk and yelled at her for it. Said, "Put the wine away from you, lady. It's not good for you." Now, why would he assume that if it wasn't actually a common occurrence? Kind of sad of a foresight when you look at the way that the house of God was being treated in that day. I mean, let's be frank, it's not much more different than the way it's treated now. But nonetheless, Hannah was gracious enough to say, "No, my Lord, I'm not drunk. I'm a woman who's vexed in spirit. I've been praying to God for a son." And so Eli, kind of picking up his bearing, he's like, "Oh, well, the Lord bless you. He's heard your prayer. You're on your way." And this, in spite of Eli's horrible ministry, God moved through Hannah. Elkanah went home, and she was there too, and she got pregnant. So that point being made there. But what's also amazing about all this is in chapter 2, and I encourage you to look this up on your own time, of 1 Samuel, Hannah prays to God after she finds out that she's pregnant, and she praises him with her song, Hannah's prayer. And if you catch the way that she phrased these things. I also encourage you to turn to the opening chapters of the Gospel of Luke, where Mary's Magnificat, the song that she sung when she praised God for having a baby beyond normal circumstances, she quotes and paraphrases the prayer of Hannah. And what's also cool about this for the girls listening is that, did you know the first time that we ever hear the term Messiah, or in Hebrew Mashiach, in Greek the Christ, that phrase, that term, the first time it's ever mentioned in the Bible was in Hannah's prayer. It was a prophecy spoken by a girl that ultimately was a foreshadowing of what Jesus would fulfill when he physically entered this world through Mary. So a very amazing parallel there. Now, meanwhile, Eli's still making a mess of God's temple. He still ignored that warning and saying, look, you're going to get kicked out. Your family's going to be cut off from the face of the earth, literally killed. You guys are no longer going to be in the priesthood. God's going to judge you for the way that you've been acting. Turn around while you still can. He's offering you mercy. He doesn't. So Samuel's born. And true to her word, Hannah brings him to the temple and says, can you raise my son to be a priest just like you? Now note, he grew up in the tribe, I believe it was of Ephraim, but he wasn't an Ephraimite. The priests lived in every single tribe, and they were the ones who were supposed to minister to God. So this family of Levi who lived in this region of the tribe of Israel, we can confirm which one later, but all these things are taking place, and Eli essentially raises little Samuel as his assistant. He'd be the one to know how the sacrifices would work, to make sure the table was showbread, the lamps were lit, probably given small jobs throughout the day, but he's growing up in there. And it was actually really cute whenever Hannah, Peninnah too, but Hannah and Elkanah, his parents, would come and visit the tabernacle every year for the festival. Hannah would have a little priest outfit sewn just for Samuel, so he would be like the little priest. And anyway, so horrible upbringing and parents, but Samuel's growing up in the environment that honors God. And what's cool about this too is Hannah, after Samuel, starts having children of her own. She gets to keep these ones. So God's blessing her and her family. But Eli, not so much. Because remember the prophecy that was spoken before Samuel was even born, right? Well, obviously he's not talking about this. He didn't even take it much to heart when he first heard it. But when Samuel was sleeping one night, he was in his formative years, probably post-bar mitzvah, but not adult, so around 12 to 13. He hears a voice in the middle of the night saying, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel never heard this before. He's like, well, I don't have a history of mental disorder. I'm not even sure what that word means. Must be Eli calling for me. So he gets up in the middle of the night. It's probably like, it says at the fourth watch, so around 3 to 6 in the morning, just before the sun's coming up. And he goes to Eli and he says, hey, you called me. And he's like, I didn't call you, go back to bed. So he's like, all right. So he goes back, and before he's even ready to close his eyes, he hears the voice again, Samuel, Samuel. And he's like, okay. So, Eli, you called me. And he says, I didn't call you, go back to bed. And so this happens again, and before he even gets back to his bed, he hears Samuel. So he turns around and goes to Eli, and he's like, you did call me. Now Eli's thinking about this, and he's like, wait a minute. Samuel, if you hear that voice again, just say, speak, Lord, for your servant hears. Now go to bed. So Samuel gets, snuggled in his little futon and everything, and then he hears Samuel, Samuel. Samuel goes, speak, Lord, for your servant hears. And then God proceeds to tell Samuel to tell Eli everything that was ultimately going to happen to him because of the things that he was doing. And so he gets up in the morning, he's sweeping, and he's just like, not making any notes. You and your family are going to get killed and all these kind of stuff. He isn't putting that in his face. He's not that kind of kid. But he's just like trying to keep it all to himself. And then Eli's like, hey, what did the Lord tell you last night? And he's like, nothing. Well, Eli, being the charmer that he was, just like with his mother, said, hey, the Lord will do to you and worse if you don't tell me what he said. Yikes. And then he goes and proceeds to tell him everything that he's been doing behind his back before he was too young to even understand why those things were wrong. And Eli hears this from Samuel. Second warning, by the way. And he just goes, yeah, I guess that's what I deserve. And then just continues on his way. Second warning ignored. So what do you think is going to happen next? Well, some time passes. They get into a bit of a tussle with their local enemies. The Philistines rally this massive army, and Israel is outnumbered, and they don't have a judge to lead them. Eli should be fulfilling that job, but much like Micah before him, see our study in Judges and summarizing what that was all about, he was not representing God in any way whatsoever. Israel had no relationship with God, therefore no confidence in him. But they still considered it just like another good luck charm, just like the other nations viewed their pagan gods. They didn't actually involve themselves in it. It was just a justification for their bad habits. Except for the true and living God, they never actually heard what he had to say. But nonetheless, Israel's shaking in their boots. They're vastly outnumbered. But then the sons of Eli, they decide, wait a minute. Back in our history, I mean, forget all this stuff in between about telling us that we shouldn't be doing the things we do every day, but what if, just like in the days of our ancestors, when they brought the Ark of the Covenant into battle, remember with Joshua? Remember with Moses? Remember with all those days where Israel was actually following God? Well, what if it was the Ark of the Covenant that was doing all this stuff? That was God's special thing. That was where God manifested his presence with his people. He wouldn't let that be taken away, would he? I know, if we bring the Ark of the Covenant into battle, then he'll have to save us. You can see where this is going. So the priests, when God didn't tell them to, took the Ark of the Covenant out of the tabernacle and brought it to the camp of the Israelites. They see the Ark, they're remembering all the Sunday school lessons that they were ignoring, and they just start screaming, going, oh my gosh, the God of Israel's with us again. And the Philistines are nearby. They hear it, and they're like, what's going on here? And they hear the cheering, and they're like, their God's with them. We know that God. Oh, no, the one that gave Samson the strength and all of these other things. I mean, no, you know what? We're all dead. Now, normally, this is where they would hightail and run. But because God wasn't with Israel, because Israel wasn't with God, it went the opposite direction. They said, well, if we're gonna die, let's die like men. And they all turn into frenzied berserkers and just rip Israel to shreds. Now, Israel's army is not only all but annihilated, but demoralized. They don't ever want to engage themselves in warfare ever again. They all go to their homes and hide. They're willing to be subjugated. They just don't want to do that again. And to make the matters worse, to put salt in the wound, if you will, the two sons of Eli get killed. The Ark of the Covenant is captured and taken into custody by the Philistines. And when word of this comes to Eli, apparently he had been taking helpings, extra helpings of those who would bring sacrifices. It says he was very fat. And when he heard the news that his two sons were killed, he's almost relieved. But then when he hears the Ark of the Covenant has been stolen, he swoons out of his chair, freaking out and saying, the God of Israel's departed. Had he? No, they were treating that object like God. It was nothing more than an idol to them. That wasn't God. That's what God used to meet with his people. But nonetheless, I guess they lost their privileges because they didn't actually understand what it was. Nonetheless, here's two sons killed, couldn't care less. The Ark of the Covenant, he falls out of his chair in this dramatic swoon, and he ends up falling on his neck, and under the enormous weight of his body, he breaks his neck and dies. Then, to make this even more tragic, the fulfillment of exactly what God said would happen if he didn't get his act together, the wife, maybe one of them, I guess, but the wife of one of the priests, the son of Eli, who had been killed in that battle, was giving birth to her son. And they said, hey, it's a boy, don't worry about it. Well, Grandpa's dead on the floor. This child's going to grow up without parents, without a father or an uncle, no matter how lousy they were. And now the Ark of the Covenant has been stolen. She is about to die in labor. She just doesn't want to hold on at this point. And she says, name him Ichabod. Ichabod Crane, the headless horseman, that's the name that it was based on. Its name means the glory has departed. No glory from Israel. Ultimately, it was just a cry of despair saying, name that baby hopeless, because what hope do we have left? And then she dies in labor. Now you could imagine Ichabod grew up as the inheritor of Aaron's bloodline, but he really wanted to do his role of high priest, he noted sarcastically. So what happens now? Does Israel just fall into a state of captivity like they did or they will in the future with Babylon and Assyria? Not yet. Because, as I recall, there was a little boy who had just reached adulthood, who had grown up in the house of God, raised by ungodly people, mind you, or rather, people in God's house who played the God talk but weren't actually godly. By the way, that's actually worse. C.S. Lewis noted there's no worse man than a religious bad man. But, point being made, he grows up with a relationship with God, and in spite of Israel's circumstances, he starts to lead a semi-revival. And for the entirety of his lifetime, for the next 30 to 40 years, Israel starts to have a relationship with God again. However, he was noted as the last judge. And here's the interesting thing about all this. The last judge before the time of kings, he wasn't the leader of Israel, but just like Joshua, just like Caleb, just like all of these individuals that we read about in the book of Judges, he was the one who represented God's authority. He was the one who ultimately reminded the people of Israel that they served the true and living God. It wasn't an anarchy or a monarchy, it was a theocracy. They followed God and his rulings. The Bible, as they had it, the Torah, was their book. Until, well, you guys remember in the book of Judges, they start to take that peace for granted. They start to take this relationship with God and the blessings that it provided for granted. And ultimately, at the end of Samuel's life, Samuel learned on his own a good relationship with God, but apparently he picked up his parenting tips from Eli because his kids were also pretty crooked. And they were looking at that and they're like, I don't want them to be the judges next. Samuel, we want a king. We want a king. Now Samuel took that personally. He's like, well, what have I been doing wrong? Have I ever taken advantage of any of you? Have I taken any money from you? Have I ever taken any payment from you? And anything that you would think that someone who has a relationship with God is like, we're not worried about you, we're worried about your kids. Well, now it's double personal. And Samuel is just stewing over this. He's like, dude, what is your guys' problems? God's been giving you guys a wonderful life, and basically going through the same thing that we saw 7 times over in the book of Judges. And God comes to Samuel and says, look, Samuel, they aren't rejecting you, they're rejecting me. I wrote about this in my law. You're to read that to them. You're to remind them of what will ultimately happen if they choose a king. But remember, you're not the one who's leading this nation. I am. They don't want me to rule this nation, so I respect their decision. However, that doesn't mean freedom of choice. It means freedom from consequence. Remind them of what that will ultimately mean. So Samuel, calming down a bit, comes to the people and he says, look, here's what the Bible says. In the book of Deuteronomy, it says that a king is commanded. Write his own copy of the law. Don't build up military strength. Don't build up a harem. Don't have a closet full of girlfriends just at your disposal. And certainly don't excess in wealth and riches. These things will ultimately turn your heart away from God. And understand as well, when you choose a king, because people are imperfect, if you have an imperfect man leading you, here's what's going to happen. He's going to tax you all into the Stone Age. He's going to use your sons and daughters as fodder, basically, to send them into battles that he may or may not win. And, most tragically, he's going to essentially make the rest of you into his personal handservants. He's going to treat you guys like peasants. But even in spite of all of these things, Israel says, we want a king. We want a king. We want a king. So Samuel says, all right, God will give you what you want. Leave. I'll anoint the first king as God calls him tomorrow. Because remember, this is still God's nation. He will choose who's your leader, who will be his representative. Now, before they leave, the people of Israel, interestingly enough, knowing what they're doing is wrong, but still going through with it anyway, we understand that a little bit. They say, well, Samuel, yeah, thank you, but... Oh, I got something in my contact here. My apologies. It says, Samuel, need an eye patch. We know you aren't really fond of this plan, and I can see God isn't either, but will you please not stop praying for us? Not stop. Will you please keep praying for us? And Samuel says, guys, it would be a sin for me to stop praying for you. So catch that. Even in the midst of Israel doing something they know is wrong, setting themselves up for destruction in a series of horrible next couple of centuries, basically. 4, in fact. He doesn't give up on them. He still encourages Samuel to pray for them. It's not even until the book of Jeremiah at the end of all of this nonsense. And by the way, take note of that. How many years were the Canaanites given to live in Israel before Joshua came and judged them for basically doing the things that Israel would ultimately end up kicked out of the land for sacrificing babies on brass ovens, making a rite of passage for kids when they were growing up to become prostitutes, boy and girl, and for these bizarre ritualistic practices that involved animals, and as well cutting yourselves and your children to celebrate the deity of the rain. 400 years. 440, actually, if you count the wanderings in the wilderness. God gave them a bonus second chance. When the Amalekites attacked Israel in the wilderness, how many years did God give them before they were ordered completely wiped out during the time of King Saul? We'll read about that in a moment. 400 years. How many years did Israel have kings and ultimately during that time resemble anything and everything but a consistent relationship with God? 400 years. Mercy's fairly consistent, always available, and once again, for those who reject it, there's not much else to blame but yourself. For those who receive it, he always follows through. Look at Jonah for an example. So Israel's first king, they refused to trust God after giving them peace in Samuel's lifetime, but accepts their decision, and a man from the tribe of Benjamin was chosen whose name was Saul. Now Saul, to quote Levi Lusko, he was really tall, really good looking, really handsome. Saul, really tall, but that's about all. He was very outwardly attractive. He appeared humble, but the problem was it was more a timidity to appear proud than rather actual humility. Because here's the interesting thing about this. Humility isn't opposed to pride. Humility is the expression of love. The opposite of pride is love, and humility is one way in which that is expressed. Here's an example. If I'm proud, I'm always self-centered. We obviously would see that present if someone's arrogant. Look at me. I'm so wonderful. I'm better than you. Who's the focus of the conversation? It's me. Self-centered attitude and heart. It's one that just rejects any notion of anything else, especially God. Now, on the other hand, we think if I want to be humble, then I have to say, I'm so lame. You're better than me. I'm the worst. Who's the focus of the conversation again? It's the same deal. Pride turned inside out. That's not humility. It's still self-centeredness. It's an attitude. So if I want to be humble, my goal is to be loving. That way, I'm other-centered. It's saying, you are a wonderful person. I like that about you. I think that is better than something I could have come up with. That's acknowledging a reality, not necessarily bringing the focus off of yourself. It's just something that comes naturally. So take a note of that. But, and again, it doesn't come naturally, something God has to do in our hearts. But Saul, he tries to come off as humble. He's like, I don't want to be king. I don't want the hiding in the barrels and stuff. When you have a nation full of 5 foot, even to 5'2" tall people, 5'2" tall people, Samuel is bringing this guy out who's around 6'3", about my height, and head and shoulders of every other man. He's quite something to look at, but it was all external, because we see over time Saul starts to show his true colors. He began okay. There was a guy whose name was Nahash, I believe it was, associated with the serpent, from the Ammonites, if memory serves correctly. And he comes to this outer city in Israel that no one would have thrown two sticks at and cared about. And he says, hey, we're going to take you over. And Israel's like, can we just negotiate? We don't really want to battle. We had this bout with the Philistines. All of our soldiers are basically college student social justice warriors now. They don't want to do anything. And so Nahash says, okay, I'll make a peace treaty with you. All I ask in return is that you all rip out your right eyes and cut off your thumbs. We have a week to think about it. Saul! Remember, when Saul was anointed as king of Israel, there were people who liked him, people who didn't like him, and just like with any sort of bout in politics, just basically life went on as normal. But now when people needed him, it wasn't obviously their first option, but when it was made their only option, now they're like, what are we going to do? Well, Saul's plowing his field with his ox and, train him on with the goat and everything. And the people come to Saul and they're like, there's this city that's about to be attacked. What are we going to do? And so Saul looks at the elders, looks at the people watching. He takes his ox goad and he cuts the thing into pieces. And he says, anyone who doesn't join my army is going to end up like this thing. And they're looking at that screaming mess and they're just like, okay, I guess we're joining the army again. They go into battle and they win. And the people who are, always Saul, pro Saul, let's bring out everyone who didn't vote for Saul and kill him right now. And Saul's like, calm down, you Twitter fiends. Well, basically it's this kind of ordeal, but over time the power starts to go to Saul's head. He's starting to see military victories. He's starting to grow in power and influence. And when it comes time for him to actually go into this battle, obviously, who's the one who wins the battle? Saul or God? Through Saul? They need to wait for the sacrifice to be offered. Samuel's getting up there in age, though, so he's taking a while. And Saul's waiting. Armies are mustering out there. They're outnumbered. The people are getting nervous. They're starting to go home. And he's like, wait. I'll do it. I know I'm the king, but I'll fulfill the role of a priest. Big mistake. There is one person in all of human history that will be both a king and a high priest, and his name is not Saul. It is Jesus Christ. So Saul, by presuming to fulfill the role of a priest, big problem. There was one other person we have record of who tried to pull this off. His name was Uzziah. God struck him with leprosy for the rest of his life because it was that serious of an issue. If you have questions about why that is and details of the verses that he knew he was disobeying, ask. But for the sake of time, he's offering the sacrifice. Samuel finally gets there and he sees the smoke. He sees the people getting ready for battle and stuff. He looks at Saul and the little garb and everything, and he's like, Saul, what have you done? It's like, sorry, you were taking too long. And dude, God's word, your priority. You aren't the authority here. You represent his. And so he's like, I'm sorry. Well, first strike. The second strike was when Israel reached the peak of its military prowess, at least during this time. I'd say the highest was probably during David or Uzziah's reign, but it was getting up there. And as their military was in this kind of state, God said, all right, Saul, it's been 400 years. The Amalekites' number is up. They are a culture of terrorists. Literally everything that they do is just to pick on the weak and innocent. And because they have had access to my word, because they were given a prophetic warning 400 years ago, and every single generation since have rejected every single opportunity to turn around and come to me, because they have had you in their nation, had access to my word, and had every reason to stop but didn't, now you are to go and wipe them out, down to the last man, woman, and child. Don't even spare their animals. Now you think, that's kind of harsh, but here's the problem. When Saul was commanded to do this, what happened when he didn't? Saul didn't just go into this battle with the idea that God would deliver the Amalekites into his hands, which he did. He was obeying his command. You have to wonder not only why, 400 years of second chances, anybody? When Noah's flood wiped out every last man, woman, and child, was that unfair? No, it was the purpose, a reason why all of these sentient and responsible human beings are rejecting God's mercy. And if he offers mercy before judgment, you reject mercy, what's left? But here's also the problem. Saul spared a lot of Amalekites, especially their king. He wanted to have him around in his throne and saying, man, Saul is this brutal merciless leader in battle. He'd be basically a hype man just to hang out in his house all the time. So he just burned down everything, his skill with the sword and all these other kind of stuff, and he just kind of live off of that giddiness with King Agag in his place all the time. Well, here's the thing. The Amalekites that escaped, they eventually repopulated. Their kids had kids. They continued to harass and brutalize and murder people on the street, including the people of Israel, refusing to let them live in peace. But here's the thing also. Long term, when we get to the book of Esther, you'd remember the holiday of Purim in Israel's history is celebrated because of what that girl did. And during the reign of the king of Persia, Esther warned the king that a certain man by the name of Haman, whose ego was so fragile that whenever he'd have one of his bi-daily parades for himself and having everyone bow down to him like he's some kind of god, a Jew by the name of Mordecai would go out of his way just to not be there. Note, he didn't like stand up all defiant and say, you're not a god, just go peddle your papers, you politician. No, he'd just say, I'm not going on that street today. Well, when Haman found out that one person didn't want to come and bow down and worship him on the street, that wasn't there, that actually intentionally wasn't there to bow down to him every single day, he said, who is that guy related to? What race is he? He's Jewish? I'm going to kill every single Jew that ever exists on the face of this planet. By the way, Haman was an Amalekite. And yet any wonder why God said the buck stops here? Don't let these people continue on the earth because they will ultimately be your destruction. If it comes to the point where a rabid animal is beyond saving, you shoot the dog to spare the kids. Otherwise, it's just going to maul them. I don't care if you want to love the wolf. You kill that animal because not only is it beyond saving, but there are those you can save. You can imagine there's some frustration here because the skeptics bring this up without actually reading. But the point being made is in all of this. Saul deliberately disobeys God, sets Israel up for a lot of grief for the next couple centuries. And Saul is basically called on the carpet about it. And he's saying, God told you to do this. You didn't do the thing. This is strike 2. Strike 3 came, interestingly enough, when he was actually, strike 2. I'm noting all of these things out of order here. Basically, noting this, I'll backtrack here and find out which one I missed. But Saul was given 3 opportunities: deliberate disobedience to God and a continual habit of this. The Amalekite thing was strike 3. I apologize. But ultimately, I skipped over a little bit here. Note the Amalekite thing is the 3rd. This is the 2nd. His son Jonathan was the one who was fighting all of Saul's battles when it came into later in life. But Saul didn't want to stop getting all the credit in the newspapers, quote unquote, for winning these battles. So whenever Jonathan would win a battle against the Philistines and driving out the people that were murdering the people of Israel on the street, robbing their homes, taking their daughters just because they felt like it, all these kind of things, they were driving these people out. And Jonathan was the one fighting the battles, but Saul was the one blowing the horn saying, we won, we won. So everyone would look at Saul and say, hey, he won. Well, when it finally came to the point where they were amassed against such a massive amount of Philistines that they actually wouldn't hear from them for a few decades after this point. And again, the Amalekite thing took place after this, then what happens next? So note the order here. First we have pretending to be a priest, then we have this, then the Amalekite thing, then what happens next? And I'll give you a hint. Goliath. The Philistines wouldn't bother Israel for a few years after this. They'd have to rebuild before Goliath got them back into battle again. But they were told, God's with you. You guys should go into battle. But Saul's like, I'm afraid. Jonathan's scouting things out, but we're outnumbered. They got chariots and we've got sticks. Okay, we've got farming tools. An army of ninjas versus a bigger army of samurais. Sure, the White Tigers pulled it off, but we didn't. That kind of situation. Saul doesn't want to go into battle. The entirety of Israel's army is afraid, but Jonathan, who has a relationship with God, by the way, the firstborn son of Saul, who's fighting all these battles, and his shield bearer, two guys. They climb up this really, really sheer rock face. I've been to Israel and I saw the place where this battle was fought. It'd be a pretty impressive thing. Jonathan was probably a very nice rock climber, but he's checking out the Philistine camp. He looks at his shield bearer and he says, hey, you know what? God doesn't need an army. He's done bigger and better things through fewer people. Why don't we see if God's going to do a miracle here today? And so sharing God's heart in this matter, the shield bearer is just like, you go for it, man. So Jonathan starts charging the lines, knocking people down. The shield bearer executes him, and that pattern just goes. They're going berserk into the Philistine lines. And after about 20 or so people are killed, God sends an earthquake to encompass the entire Philistine camp. And they all freak out and start running for their lives, for those of them who hadn't already been killed already. So God literally won this battle through two people. Saul sees the army running, and he decides to take the credit. And he says, no one is going to eat today until you all have taken vengeance on my enemies. So, making this all about him. And Saul, basically by doing this, is setting up the entirety of the nation to eventually tire out, get hypoglycemic, and be unable to actually wipe out the Philistines so that they wouldn't have to deal with certain situations in the future, like Goliath. So Saul basically sets them all up for failure. Now remember, he tells the entire nation this, but who's the one actually out in the battle, out of earshot to hear these orders? His son Jonathan and his shield bearer. So they're all fighting, they're running down the Philistines. Jonathan, like a normal human being, gets a little tired and winded. He needs a granola bar or something, so he looks up and he sees a honeycomb, and so he's like, oh, blood sugar, great. And so he starts sucking on it, and one of the other Israelites goes, ooh, your dad said he'd kill anyone who ate before all of the Philistines were wiped out. And Jonathan's like, that's stupid. Why would he say something like that? I didn't know. And so they just go continuing fighting the battle. And so a lot of Philistines escape. The entirety of the nation is exhausted, starving, and eventually get so much so to the point where they are just so hungry that they just start going, look, we're going to die if we don't eat something. And so they look at just the animals in the wild. They just take something and they aren't even eager enough to cook it. They just kill it and then just start going zombie on it. Now remember, there were two things that the people of Israel were supposed to do with animals. One, not just kill indiscriminately. You were supposed to cook them. But two, you were supposed to properly bleed them. For the same reason. It was unhealthy to eat meat, A, raw, and B, just straight off the farm. You don't strangle the chicken, cut its head off, and then eat it while the blood's still inside of it. Infections and diseases skyrocket when you start doing stuff like that. You need to bleed things properly. For Israel, it was ceremonious. God said, well, instead of explaining the germ theory, I'll just kill two birds with one stone. Trust me. But they just start going all zombie on this, and Saul literally caused the entirety of the nation to sin for the sake of his own ego. And so he's like, hey, stop. We're got a big barbecue here. Someone get something kosher to eat. And so the entirety of the nation runs in. Samuel's just looking at Saul going, strike two, pal. The Amalekite thing was strike three. But this is where you really see Saul's character on display, because while the entirety of the nation was recovering from this barbecue gone wrong, Samuel's obviously as pleased as Peach, but then Saul says, I heard one of you disobeyed my orders. And the entirety of the nation doesn't want to say anything, saying, I said I would kill anyone who didn't eat anything until you guys would wipe them all out. Now, who was it? And Jonathan just steps up to his dad and he's like, dude, what the actual heck? You're going to kill me for something this dumb? They got away. Well, again, he was more respectful than I'm paraphrasing here. They took lots. All of these things were being made to surface the point. But Saul says, so you're really going to kill me because I ate something and I didn't actually hear the orders? And he says, yeah, I'm going to kill you, firstborn son. Well, the entirety of the nation gets around Jonathan. It's like, dude, we all ate something. This is your fault. And so they protect Jonathan. Saul's made out to be an idiot, but he still thinks it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. The Amalekite thing takes place. Now it's strike 3. And Samuel basically comes up to Saul and he says, Saul, 3 strikes, you're out. You have disobeyed God. And he's like, oh, no, Samuel, you don't understand. You see, the animals I spared because they were just such good things. I wanted to sacrifice them to God, making all churchy and stuff. I spared this king's life because I don't actually have an excuse for that. The people that I let go away, Samuel said, dude, obedience is more important to God than sacrifice. He wants a relationship with you, not your religious ceremonies. And because you've disobeyed God this day, not this one day, but many days before this, by the way, you have lost any right to be used as king of Israel. No, it didn't mean Saul couldn't be used as king, or used at all, but he wouldn't be used as king. So Saul's like, no, I want to be king. Samuel, wait, why don't we just pray and ask for forgiveness? I'm sorry, I won't do it again. And Samuel's not listening. He just walks away. So Saul grabs the old man's robe and he's like, no, Samuel, don't go. Samuel keeps walking and the robe rips. He turns around and he looks at Saul and he says, just like this robe, the kingdom's going to be ripped away from you. And he keeps going. Now this is where Saul starts to head downhill. Because in the time that it took for the Amalekites to not only be engaged, but to be let go, the Philistines have also had the opportunity to rebuild, and all under their new champion, Goliath. And having such confidence in this new leader, they're saying, hey, tallest guy versus our tallest guy. Send your champions out, win this battle right now. If you win, we'll be your slaves. But if we win, we get to treat you however we want. You'll be our slaves. And note, Israeli definition of slavery versus pagan, 2 very different things. So Goliath stepping out there. Dude was 9 foot 6 feet tall. The tip of his spear, the metal part, was the weight of an Olympic shot put. It was 25 pounds, and he had to have another whole human being to just hold his massive shield up. I mean, this guy wasn't just had a pituitary gland problem where he was tall and skinny. He was tall and thick. This guy was few words would describe him, but I can think of a few. It'd be like, double stacked, triple stacked, hotter than the sand, bigger than the ocean. He'd be a classic professor. You know what I'm talking about? The dude lifts. That meme wouldn't even work with him. So Goliath standing out there, he's cursing the king of Israel. He's cursing the people of Israel. He curses the God of Israel. And he's just going on these rants for days upon days. No one is willing to, especially the man who now knows that God's no longer with him. He doesn't want to get killed. And he especially doesn't want anyone else in the nation to know that he is no longer called by God to be their king. He wants to hold on to power even if it's not what God gave to him. Meanwhile, a man by the name of Samuel, who's the protagonist in this tale, so to speak, he's waiting for God to hear who's going to be the next king, who's going to take over Saul. Bumming a little bit about Saul too, because he's the one who saw this guy grow. He's like, man, is my legacy limited to that basket case? And God says, just go to the town of Bethlehem. Go to the family of a man named Jesse and await further instructions. It's going to be one of his kids. So he does. He goes. He isn't told all the details, but he does with what he's told. He obeys what God told him to. He goes to Bethlehem. The people are like, hey, what are you doing here, Samuel? Well, Samuel says, where's Jesse's family? I'm Jesse. Well, bring out your kids. I'm here to anoint the next king of Israel. So Jesse's like, sure, great. And so he brings out his firstborn son. He's a lot like Saul, really tall, really buff, really set. And Samuel's like, man, look at that guy. That guy's definitely king material. So he gets out his thing of oil to anoint him just like a high priest would. And then God says, Samuel, you look at his appearance, but I've rejected him. And this is a very important passage in understanding the heart of God. 1 Samuel 16 and verse 7. The Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. God cares more about who you are, not who you resemble. So this guy, very impressive, but he didn't have a relationship with God. It would just be Saul all over again. So Samuel says to Jesse, "No, this isn't the guy." And so, he lines up all of his sons, and, they're all pretty impressive looking, but he's looking down the line. Nope, 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 nope. And he runs out of people to nope. So he's like, "Do you have anyone else?" And Jesse says, "Well, we have the youngest, whose name was David, but he's got like this. He's the curly redhead. He likes writing poems and singing to God. I just leave him with the shepherd so he doesn't embarrass anybody." And Samuel's like, "Just bring him out here." So David comes over. He's a good-looking, bright-eyed little kid. Not much to look at that point, but still. And God says, "That's the one." So Samuel takes out his flask of oil, dunks it over the kid's head, and says, "Hail the next king of Israel," and then just leaves. And David's sitting there just covered in oil, and he's just like, "So do I just go back to the sheep now, or what?" Jesse's like, "Yeah, I guess." So he goes off, and by the way, a draft is called to fight the Philistines, battle Goliath, right? And all of Jesse's sons qualify, so they go off to battle. David's still at home, and he's honoring God with where he's at. No, he knows he's going to be the next king, but he's just like, "You know what? God has me here. I'm cool with that." Time passes. Jesse's like, "Hey, your brothers are probably hungry. Why don't you bring them this cheese and bread?" And so he's like, "Great, I get to be a pizza delivery boy for the glory of God." So he goes and he brings food to his brothers, and meanwhile, Goliath is in the middle of one of his cursing God triades. No one's doing anything about it. So, David's taking this personally. He's going, "Someone tell me," quoting Levi Lusko again, "someone's going to pop that guy on the mouth. He's talking bad about my God. We're the people of Israel, for crying out loud. Someone throw something at this guy. God will fill in the details as to where it hits." And Jesse's sons, David's older brothers, they're just like, "David, look, I know what you're doing. We can't come to back you up right now. I know you got in all those fights when you were in grade school. You were the spunky little kid that thought you could get away with everything because Big Brother would handle it. I can't handle him. You can't handle him. Do you understand this?" And David's like, "Dude, I'll fight that guy, and I'll do it not with you, but because God's on my side." So Jesse's oldest son rolls his eyes and just walks away. But the people of Israel are like, "He volunteers, let's do it." So they bring him to Saul and says, "Hey, this kid volunteered to fight Goliath for you." And Saul had told them earlier, "Anyone who volunteers to kill Goliath for me, I'll let him marry my daughter Michal, and I'll give him all this money and glory and make him a general in my army." Well, David volunteered, so they're just like, "Hey, here's the kid." And Saul's like, "Great, do you want my armor? Let me take your measurements. It might come in handy for your casket later." And David's like, "Yeah, I'm not, this isn't how I fight." It wasn't as if the armor was too big. That was probably a factor. Saul was 6'3", David was in his 4 foot. But you understand the point. He's like, I'm not the knight build, When I was watching my father's sheep, I killed a lion once with my sling. And God protected me from the lion. It'll be no different than this Philistine. There was a bear that once came and took our sheep. I grabbed it by the beard, punched it in the face, and killed it. It'll be no different than this Philistine. I'll fight in the way I know God's used me. And so Saul's like, "Okay, well, can we still get your measurements for that casket? I mean, I can get your family a good deal on life insurance." Well, David rolls his eyes and he grabs 5 smooth stones from the river. By the way, he didn't use all 5 stones. He used 1 to kill Goliath. Goliath had 4 other brothers. So he's planning long term for this. But he goes, he has his bag full of stones, and Goliath sees this little kid coming at him. And remember, to a 9'6" tall guy, the kid's not only unimpressive, but it's doubly impressive when you're looking at an NBA to a preschooler. So you're just like, he's just shaking his head and saying, "Am I a dog that you would throw a stick at me? I'm going to gut you and feed you to the birds, little man." And so while they're trash talking, David returns the favor and he's saying, "I'm going to feed you to the birds because the God of Israel is the one who's going to knock you on your head. I'm going to cut your head off." All these other fun stuff. So Goliath's peeved and David's getting pumped up. So Goliath starts charging him. And David takes out one of the smooth stones. He lets loose on his sling, lodges itself. No, it doesn't just clunk and bruise his skull and he falls unconscious. It embeds itself into his head, but not his skull. So he's not dead, but he's certainly hurting. He gets the stone lodged in his head and falls over. And David, not having any weapons on him, grabs Goliath's own sword. It's probably as big as he was. And he cuts Goliath's head off while he's still unconscious. And so, holding up a head that was probably as big as he was, he's cheering and celebrating. And the Philistines are like, if a little shrimp kid can do that to our best guy, what can they do? They come off running. And the Israelites drive him out. Now, what's hilarious about this is David's dragging this head around with him for weeks, like a show and tell project. I'm a dude. I find that funny. Anyway, so Saul has to go through with his bargain. He's like, I guess you're a general now, but about my daughter and stuff, I don't know. And then Israel starts to look at David and it's like, man, God's used this guy. And Saul's looking at him like, no, God used this guy. It's like, David, man, he whooped that Philistine. It's like, I fight Philistines too. And then they start writing songs about David. Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. And Saul's like, oh, he's like playing it on repeat on his radio. And he's like, he wants to steal my kingdom from me. Everyone loves him and not me. I gotta kill this guy. So, since David's a general and still a kid, he says, hey, David, got a special task mission for you. You're going to be outnumbered 10-1, and you're going to have all these under-equipped soldiers, but you understand, God will be with you, right? He's like, yeah, let's do this. So he goes into battle, and he wins. And now Israel's praising him again. He's like, he fought against unsurmountable odds. God's using this guy. He's the next anointed. And Saul's like, this isn't working. Oh, wait a minute. He's starting to get in good with my family. Him and Jonathan, they're bros and hanging out, but I can see my daughter Michal. She's got eyes for him. I know I should have already given her his marriage, but he goes to David and he says, you eyeing my daughter here? He's like, oh no, sir, she's beautiful. She's your daughter, but I don't want to be disrespectful. And he's like, no. You want to marry her? I'd be happy to call you my son-in-law. And he's like, how am I supposed to pay the dowry? She's a princess. I'm a shepherd. How's that going to work? And so he says, oh, no money. What I want you to do is I want you to go into battle, and I want you to bring me just 100 foreskins of the Philistines to take revenge on the king's enemies. For those of you who don't know, basically what Saul was telling David to do was to, after killing 100 Philistines by himself, he'd also have to cut their junk off and bring a big bag of it back with him. Well, David not only pulls this off, but he brings 200. Obviously, he was really digging Michal. He's just happy Valentine's Day, sicko. They get married, and now David is in the royal family. So he's like, this couldn't backfire anymore. What am I going to do? Well, he starts to develop a little bit of... Well, he just wasn't all right in the head already, but let's just say now he's starting to talk to himself. And the advisors of Saul are starting to notice this. He's like, look, Saul's not right up here. We should probably get someone to calm him down. Does anyone have any musicians? David's already there. He's like, hey, I've been playing the harp for years. I got all these songs for God. So he was brought up after some qualifications were tested to sing some of the books that are written today in the Psalms to him, calm him down and stuff. And it works for a while. But the problem was Saul just sought it as a remedy, not as a reason to turn back to God. And remember that worship music can set the mood for your soul, but moods pass if you don't take advantage of what worship is intended to do. That's why before oftentimes doing Bible studies, we sing songs of worship, not because it's some tradition that we just do because we do it, but because there's actually a purpose. It sets your mind, your mood, your heart on the things of God. So when you're done singing about God, you're already in the mood to hear about the things of God. If you just sing for singing's sake, quite frankly, most worship songs that I know are kind of lame. The only reason we like them is because they remind us of the one that we love. You note this and the reason why we do this ministry. But that's the point that's being made there. Saul felt good for a while, but then went back into his moods. And eventually his moods ended up getting so dark, with David as the paradigm of what everything wrong in his life was about, that he tries to murder him by throwing a spear at his head twice. Now, catch that. Again, Levi Lusko made this illustration, but I think it's so worth repeating because it's just frankly hilarious. He throws the spear at David's head, and David just ducks, and he keeps playing. I mean, what do you say to someone after that? Sorry, there was a spider. But then he does it again, and David puts two spears and two situations where it went at his head together and says, maybe I shouldn't be here anymore. So he leaves. His wife, Michal's really digging him. She's covering for him. Jonathan's also got his back. But Saul's obviously looking to put something in his back. So Jonathan, Michal, David, they're all together. And he's like, dude, my dad's off the rocker. You got to get out of here. And David's like, well, I got a job to do. And he's, we'll just test this. If it was just a bad moment for him, he's getting old. He has those moods. I'm going to make sure that he's not has any hostile intent. That was just a one-time thing. So they go to celebrate a holiday, a feast, where he'd expected to be among the family, the in-laws, right? But Saul's, sitting there putting thumbtacks and scorpions and tarantulas on David's chair and making sure it's labeled for David and gold and stars and stuff. And Jonathan's like, hey, Dad, good to see you. So he starts eating. Saul's like, where's David? Oh, he was going to spend it with his family in Bethlehem. Oh, okay. So he just keeps eating. Jonathan's like, okay, this is a good sign. So he comes back the next day just to make sure. And, he's putting poison dart frog tipped thumbtacks on David's chair and just, like putting a bomb underneath his chair and everything. And Jonathan's like, hey, Dad, how you doing? And where's David? He's sick today. Jonathan, you're with him, aren't you? And so he throws a spear at his son's head. Like he solves all of his problems. What's interesting about this is before he threw the spear at his head, he went on to explain why he was trying to kill David, and it was all for Jonathan. And when Jonathan tries to defend David reasonably, he throws a spear at his head. Classic SJW. But Jonathan gets out of there, and he tells David in their special code, you got to get out of here. My dad's gone mental. Run. So he goes into hiding, but of course, before he goes, he needs food and needs weapons to defend himself, hunting as well as practicality. So he goes to the house of God. And where they were keeping it, the tabernacle, he goes to the priest that was on that day, and he says, hey, I can't really tell you anything. I just need some food and I need some weapons or anything you have. And so David looks around, the priest looks around, he's like, well, this is house of sacrifice. We don't really have much. I don't think the sacrificial knives, these are set aside for God. There's the sword that you left here that you took from Goliath. And he's like, yeah, I remember that one. So he takes Goliath's sword, and that's what he'd use to fight with. And then he says, we don't have any food here except the table of the showbread. That's where they'd lay out the 12 massive loaves that would always be before God as a symbol and a representation of God's people always being welcome before him, that he's communing with his people. Eating back then meant a lot more than it does today because they didn't have utensils. If you were eating some meat, you'd grab it with your hands and eat it. You'd dip in the soup, and there wasn't any rules for double dipping. You all didn't have your own bowls. You'd all be eating the same bread, eating the same soup. Your germs would be their germs. It was a compliment. It was saying you and I are becoming one. So when God says, I want to commune with you through bread, that's the point. Also applied to something later. But nonetheless, he gives him the showbread anyway, even though that was a direct violation of the law. And Jesus actually answered this, used this as an example of how God cares more about the good well-being of people, the livelihood of people, than he does about religious ceremony and sacrifice. He was willing to compromise at this point because human life was worth more. He was willing to save David's life and that of his men, as opposed to just saying, no, we don't do that in church. There's things that you can and can't compromise on. That's not one of them. So David takes the bread, takes the sword, and he leaves. The priest doesn't know anything. He's just doing his job. He sees someone who needs help, he gives it to him. So he's probably preparing more bread to replace it. And then someone from the local town says, hey, David was here. He went to collude with this priest. So Saul's like, get the armies together. And then he marches on the tabernacle, and he's got his torches and everything. And he says, I heard that you were conspiring with a war criminal, an enemy of the state, a terrorist. And the priest is like, he just came in asking for food. I don't. And then the snitch who told Saul about all this, name's not important, he says, yeah, man, he's the one who did it. He gave him weapons, too. I didn't know he was a terrorist. What's your deal? And so Saul says, you've sided with David. Kill all the priests of God. You can imagine when Saul said that, all the soldiers at his side just looked at him. They looked at the priest. And then they looked at him again. They're just like, dude, you need to reassess where you're standing in all of this. You're not in charge. God's in charge. And so Saul's like, who has the, going old Denethor from Lord of the Rings, who has the courage to do his Lord's will? And so the guy who snitched on him says, I'll do it. And he grabs one of the soldiers' swords, slaughters over 50 people. All the priests of God that were serving in the tabernacle. Saul's definitely shown where his real allegiances lie. David finds out about this. He actually writes a psalm in honor of it, but he's just grieving. All of these horrible things are happening because Saul's gone mental, and it's just a bad situation. Let's just note that. So he's hiding in these mountains, and actually the Valley of the Young Goats. I actually got to see some of those very same goats there. They are the cutest things in history. They got the little buds, and they don't go bad, they go me, but that's neither here nor there. I'm just making a little fun nostalgic moment. David is in hiding, and more people are starting to join him. They see that not only their king is a homicidal, delusional maniac, but they're also noting, David, we've seen God's hand on your life. We've seen the things that you've done. We know the things that you have yet to do. We heard even that Samuel's anointed you as the next king. We want to be with you. And David's just going, I live in a cave. I have nothing literally to offer you. And they just said, well, we just want to be where God's working. So they hanged out with him in the cave. They hunted with him. They stayed with him. They were in hiding with him. And so Saul is hunting them down. They're hiding in these caves. And Saul, tired from a day's work, he's starting to close in on David, but he doesn't know it. He just says, oh man, I gotta drop a log here. So he decides to go into one of the caves to relieve himself. And it's the same cave that David and all of his men are hiding in. So you got Saul, squatting. He's got his skirt laid over a branch or something. And, then after losing 5 pounds, he decides to take a nap in the cool of the cave. And David, Saul's sleeping, and you got like 500 little beady eyes in the dark, and they're all looking at David going, this is from God. Kill him. We can finally have this over. You'll be king. And David says, no, I'm not going to lay a hand on the one that God's called to be king. No, David didn't know that he was no longer king. He was a kid working in his father's fields before he knew any of this. He says, no, this is the one that God's called. I'm not touching him. I love God too much to stand against the one that he's called, even if he is crazy. I trust God. Definite demonstration of character there. But to prove this to Saul, he finds his robe and stuff. He cuts off a little edge, and then he just waits back. And then Saul wakes up. He gets outside of the cave. David steps out of the cave. He goes, hey, you feel that draft? Who turned my dress into a mini skirt? Levi, let's go. If you wonder where all these references are from, FreshLifeChurch.com. Fantastic Bible studies. But anyway, he said, oh my gosh, what did you do? And he says, I could have killed you, but I didn't. I'm your son-in-law. I'm your servant. One of your generals. I'm not your enemy. Let's just establish that much. And so Saul starts crying. He's like, oh man, I'm such an idiot. David, will you ever forgive me? This is all my fault. This is everything's wrong with me. Just can you please forgive me? And David just says, just go. Nothing needs to be forgiven here. And so Saul's like, okay, I'm never going to do this again, David, I promise. Until David obviously has enough common sense to just move to another cave. But after a while, the prophet Samuel dies. Natural causes, old age. But since Saul killed all of the priests of God, this would be the last of the godly influences that he would have in his life. And so with this spiritual void made, guess what took over? Guess what he did next? So he's hunting down David, and he's starting to close in. And learning his lesson from the last time, he's not going to take a Mondo Duke without protection. So, oh boy, he's not going to do that again. So he has his entire army camp in a circle around him. And David's looking at this thing, and he says, oh boy, is God going to protect us this time? Well, he did. He actually, normally someone would be required to be on watch. You got this whole army sleeping at the same time. God caused them all to literally go comatose so that David would be able to sneak through. So he's like, all right, well, why don't you come with me? And so they sneak through the camp. They're stepping over bodies. They're all sawing logs. And then finally they get to Saul and the chief bodyguard of his, Abner, his best warrior, who, by the way, wasn't much of a warrior. You'll find out in 2 Samuel. Actually, he was much of a warrior. He was just a coward, but that's neither here nor there. So he crawls over Abner. He sees Saul sleeping, and then he decides, instead of to pick up Saul's spear and run him through with it, he takes his spear and his water canteen and just leaves. And the guy next to him is like, dude, kill him. He says, no, same deal. So he walks outside the camp, and he just yells out, hey, Abner, why aren't you doing your job? I got your boy Saul's spear and his water. And Saul's like, my spear. No, not my... That's not what happened. But anyway, he realizes what he's done is stupid. He gives the whole apology all over again. They all leave, apologize, same thing over again. Get your spear back, here's your water, blah, blah, blah. David makes a mistake. He realizes God's been able to help him these 2 times, but can he help him a third? Not likely. False, but that's what he chose to do. He decided that the only way to make sure that he wouldn't end up getting killed as a result of all of this would be to hide in the one place where Saul wouldn't go, and that was in Philistine territory. He goes to the king of the Philistines and says, hey, Saul has made me an enemy, and I'm, putting on a show here. He's saying, I'm tired of living in Israel. I want to fight for you. We'll just take this little city, me and my men, we'll serve in your army. We'll fight the people of Israel. They've done nothing for me, right? Putting on this thing here. And so the king's like, I'll give you a few practice runs here. I think I like to see where this is going. You're that David, right? Slain his tens of thousands. I heard your record. Well, David starts to do the job that Saul's not. And all the time that Saul's trying to butcher David and hunting him down in civil matters, just like with Abimelech and the son of Gideon, he's neglecting Israel's security, the one thing that a king's supposed to do. So David's out fighting the Amalekites, and he's burning down cities, killing every last man, woman, or child, making sure there's no survivors so that no reports go back to their allies, the Philistines. Then he comes back with all this loot, right? And the king's like, man, you got a pretty paycheck here today. Where'd you get all that from? And he says, oh, I raided it from my old neighbors. Fight some Israelites here today. And the king's like, man, you are a pirate just like me. You and I, we get along. You're a scoundrel, aren't you? You're a rogue Han Solo. I like that. We're going to get along. And he's lying to him. I know, he's doing what God told him to do. He's doing what Saul should be doing, but the ends don't justify the means. You're predicating this relationship on fraud. And it starts to end up paying the piper, because while this is starting to go on, the Philistines are gaining up power. And they're saying, like, look, we've gotten tired of these people of Israel. We have gathered an army together that's going to wipe them off the face of the earth. And we'd like you, David, to be at the front. We'd like you to be our vanguard. We'd like to lead the charge. You've had more experience killing Israelites than any of us. We forgive you for the whole, I forgive you anyway, of the whole Goliath thing. Why don't you join us in this battle? Now this is where David either has to come clean and get his head clean off, or he's actually going to end up having to kill his own people. Fortunately, God's a God of restoration. And he was able to work in the hearts and minds of the other Philistine generals and say, yeah, I don't trust this guy. What if he just turns around and starts butchering us? I'm not going to battle if he's going to battle. And so all the kings are standing down, or all the generals are standing down, and the king's like, sorry, David, my hands are tied here. I can't have you just in my army and all of them gone. And why don't you just go home? We'll take care of this. And so David's like, thanks, I guess. So definitely dodged a bullet there, only to come home and find a bomb. The city that they were living in, Philistine territory, well, the Amalekites hadn't taken kindly to them having all their homes burned and butchered and raided all these years. And so they gathered together and kidnapped David's family and all the families of David's men. All of David's men are looking at David going, this is what we get for not fighting with God on our side. They wanted to kill him. But David says, you know what? I'm coming back to God here. We're going to do this. We're going to go find these Amalekites. We're going to kill them. And what do you know? One of their slaves had just run away. They give him food. They give him water. And they say, hey, where'd you come from? And he says, oh, my Amalekite master. He just made off with these people. He didn't need me anymore. He was going to kill me. I got away. Well, where are they? Oh, just a few miles that way. So David and all of his men go and see the Amalekite camp. They don't have any of their weapons on them. They aren't prepared for battle. They're celebrating. They got all of David's family. It hasn't been touched. They got all of David and his men's stuff. They haven't been destroyed or burned or anything. They haven't been violated or anything. And so David's just like, yeah, this is from God. So they go in, they destroy the Amalekites, they save all their families, and they return to Israel. Now, meanwhile, during this time in which David was in exile, quote unquote, Saul had no godly influences left in his life. And instead of going for attempt number 3 to kill David, because he couldn't find him for obvious reasons, he saw the Philistines were amassing a massive army. And he realized, I really should have been spending that time building up our military, shouldn't I? Are we all going to die? And so he starts asking God. He couldn't ask any priest because he killed them all. But God, are we going to win? Chirp, chirp, chirp. No answer. Does anyone want to pray for me? Chirp, chirp, chirp. No one wants anything to do with him. So he says, why don't we consult a witch? If God won't help me, maybe one of the other gods will. Get the point? Saul is definitely down here. So he goes to a place called Endor. Long before Star Wars, by the way. That's a real place. He goes to this place called Endor. He goes in the black market, I guess, the black magic market, and finds himself a witch. And remember, these people, they're just con artists. They kind of people who do seances and soothsaying. They do what's called cold or hot readings. They know how to read body language, or they hide people in the audience with headpieces. They drill people. They just put on a show and manipulate people into thinking that they are receiving these divine revelations from above or below. Most likely the below. But understanding the point that's being made there, this witch says, oh, who do you want me to conjure for you? And that's my witch impression. And Saul says, he's hiding, obviously. He doesn't want this woman to know that he's the king of Israel. That's one of the good things he actually did was he made witchcraft illegal in Israel and expelled all of them. He still found one. And the woman says, who do you want me to conjure? The prophet Samuel. Okay, so she starts putting on her show, not really knowing who that is, and then she starts screaming. like sincerely screaming for her life. And she looks at Saul and she's like, you're King Saul, you tricked me. It's like, no, what's going on? It's like, I see a man coming out of the earth. This doesn't normally happen. He's clothed in white. That's where that idea came from. I said, oh, well, where is he? And then he turns around and he sees Samuel. And so he bows down and he starts worshiping him. Samuel, obviously, being very pleased by Saul in his life, now getting called back. No, the seance wasn't what did this. God allowed this to happen because this was going to be one final pronouncement of judgment on Saul. Samuel's like, dude, what do you want? Why do you disturb my rest? And Saul's like, I just need to know what's going to happen tomorrow. And Samuel's like, you want a prophecy? You're going to die along with your whole family, and you're going to join me. Not in heaven. Heaven wasn't open for anyone yet because Jesus hadn't sacrificed in ultimately redeeming us all from our sins. So they went to a place called Sheol, called the grave, where there was two sections, one for the righteous who were expecting God's promises and those who had known and rejected them. When Jesus spent 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, that's what that meant. He was actually going to retrieve those and parading it through heaven, those who had trusted in God's promises or understood their need for God's mercy in however capacity that meant before the time of Christ, and then they would be taken to heaven. Now, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. For those who don't know the Lord or reject the Lord, definitely the latter, they are awaiting judgment in that place. The righteous component is empty. But this Samuel says to Saul, you're going to lose. And then he just leaves. And Saul, feeling wonderful about this, just sitting there all despondent, and his men are like, Saul. And the woman, the witch, is like, Saul, are you okay? You should probably eat something, don't you think? Saul's like, okay. So he eats. He goes on with his life for the next 12 hours. And then when the battle comes the next day, what happens? Well, Saul gets hit down with an arrow. He's mortally wounded, but not dying. Or he's dying, but not dead, rather, I guess is the best way to put it. And he knows that the Philistines are notorious for having fun with prisoners after battle. So he turns to his shield bearer, his bodyguard, and he's like, hey, can you please kill me? He's like, I have one job, that's not it, sorry. And then he leaves. So Saul kills himself. And when David hears about this, instead of celebrating that one of his enemies are dead, he starts weeping, and he actually writes a psalm based on this. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. So even to the end of his life, David did not have an enemy in Saul. What a contrast to someone who has a relationship with God. Even when he messed up, he could be restored. Someone who didn't have a relationship with God, he can only put on the spiritual act so long before he went downhill, and downhill fast. Hopefully we can learn something from that. And that, I think that's enough that needs to be talked about. That's the end of the book of 1 Samuel. Thank you for taking the time to listen. If you have sincere questions or want to know more details about these things, name, places, people, side things that were left out, details about Michal, things about Jonathan, please leave them in the comments below. If you'd like to encourage the ministry, you know where to go. But most importantly, if you know someone who's familiar with the Bible as a whole, but perhaps would benefit from having these summaries and access to them, please share the study with anyone you feel would be blessed by it. Thank you for your time and listening to the study. Remember that Jesus loves you, and remember that a relationship with God doesn't keep you from making mistakes. It makes all the difference, and ultimately who will see you restored afterwards.